All right, two pieces of big news came down last night while I was grilling those pizzas. Right after we finished talking about the 49ers' strategic shift, which obviously pertains to the Brock Purdy negotiations. Well, the news that came down also pertains to the Brock Purdy negotiations. Geno Smith, rather surprisingly, traded from the Seattle Seahawks to the Las Vegas Raiders. And I say rather because not the biggest shock in the world, but the fact that Seattle is now probably going to target Sam Darnold creates this potentially cascading effect that can only help Brock Purdy in his current situation with the 49ers looking for a new contract. So I'll explain the market forces and everything tying this kind of stuff together. But first, why don't we look at the NFC West ramifications? Geno Smith had been the starting quarterback of the Seattle Seahawks for 3 seasons, had been with them since 2019. So that goes way back into the Pete Carroll era because he was Russell Wilson's backup in 2019, 2020, and 2021. By 2022, Russell Wilson was gone and Geno Smith was the starter. 2022, 2023, 2024 was the Geno Smith era in Seattle. And it was an era that actually saw diminishing returns. First season where he said that he never wrote back. Remember that? Geno Smith was drew some nice national attention. It was a good story. First season, number 7 QBR. Second season for Geno Smith, 2023, dropped down to number 14 QBR. Third season, dropped down to number 21 QBR. The whole time, he was also approaching his mid-30s. 35-year-old quarterback now. So obviously somebody that is past his physical prime, and it looks like he's past his production prime as well, despite the rebirth a couple seasons ago in Seattle. Managed to only beat the 49ers once, which was this past season. It was probably the very worst version of the 49ers that he faced. I would say definitely the worst version of the 49ers that he faced. And the only reason that he was able to do it is because Nick Bosa got hurt. That's when that oblique injury happened for Bosa, couldn't continue in the game, and it happened on the sack of Geno Smith. And as soon as he exited the game, Seattle actually was able to start moving the football. So it was a dreary season for the 49ers, so dreary that even Geno Smith was able to beat them. I think that Seattle saw themselves being in purgatory. They've got Mike Macdonald, a new defensive-minded head coach. They feel they can climb the ranks defensively and build a team. They want to build a team like the Ravens, but obviously the Ravens have Lamar Jackson at the quarterback position. And there's a realization, and I think a lot more NFL teams should have this realization, that if you don't have your guy at quarterback, you don't have a chance to win a Super Bowl. If you have a mid-tier guy at best like Geno Smith, there's no chance that you're going to be able to win it all. So what are you even doing? You have to have an upper-tier quarterback to make a legitimate run at it. So for Mike Macdonald and Seattle, like the new coaching staff that came in, I think that it's relatively easy to move on from somebody who was already there when you came. Now they can bring in their own guy, and it might be Sam Darnold. Diana Rossini said that Seattle's going to pivot to a pursuit of Sam Darnold, and this is where the quarterback market dominoes are going to be really interesting. We got a handful of teams who don't know who their starting quarterback's going to be in 2025. The Vikings, Darnold's soon-to-be former team, one of them. The Steelers, they might bring back Justin Fields, maybe even Russell Wilson. We'll see. The Saints probably are going to stick with Derek Carr. He's still under contract, but there's a vesting option in that contract coming up. We're going to see how the Saints approach that. Obviously, the Seahawks, are they going to pursue Sam Darnold? That appears to be the case. The New York Giants, the New York Jets, the former team of Aaron Rodgers, the New York Jets, maybe the future team of Aaron Rodgers is the New York Giants. We'll see how that all works out. The Tennessee Titans, the Cleveland Browns, who for some reason, even though they don't know who the quarterback is going to be this next year, think that they should play hardball with Myles Garrett. That remains a joke in Cleveland. We've already criticized them plenty this week, though. And then there were the Raiders, but the Raiders are going to have Geno Smith, who's going to want 40 to 45 million annually from the Las Vegas Raiders and his former coach, Pete Carroll. There's obviously that connection there since Geno was in the Seattle building since 2019. So put it this way. If Geno is able to command 40 to 45 million at age 35, what's Sam Darnold, a significantly younger quarterback, still in his mid-20s, going to command in Seattle, assuming that he signs there? Darnold reportedly wants at least a 3-year deal. So he doesn't want this 1-year prove it kind of situation. He thinks that because Minnesota went 14-3 and he played decently well over that 14-3 stretch, he wasn't a world beater by any imagination. That Brian Flores defense had a lot to do with it. But last year was Darnold's year of playing on a prove it deal, $10 million. It was a bridge starter contract, right? That's what Sam Darnold played for in 2024. He now feels that his performance in the upper half of the league this past year, despite the fact that he flamed out when it meant most at the end of the season, he believes that his performance calls for a big contract with the Seattle Seahawks or whoever he signs with. But it looks like the Seattle Seahawks, once Darnold becomes available in free agency and the tampering window opens on Monday, it looks like the Seahawks are going to be the pursuers here of Sam Darnold. So let's wait to see what Geno gets in his renegotiated deal with the Las Vegas Raiders, because the Raiders have traded for a quarterback who was negotiating with Seattle, but Seattle apparently determined that they weren't willing to go up to 40 or 45 million. But the Raiders, it sounds like they might be willing to go up to 40 or 45 million. Let's wait to see what Geno Smith at 35 gets. And then let's wait to see what Sam Darnold at a much younger age gets with the Seattle Seahawks, presumably. And all you can say is that there's no way that this hurts Brock Purdy in his standing with the 49ers in their contract negotiations. It can only help him because Brock Purdy is a significantly better quarterback than both of the guys that we're talking about right now who are soon to sign new contracts. If the contract for Geno Smith comes in really low, he was making $25 million previous to this, and the contract for Sam Darnold comes in relatively low, comes in the 20s or in the 30s, well, all that Brock Purdy has to show anybody is that he's significantly better than those quarterbacks. So you should say, oh, yeah, well, of course I should be higher than Sam Darnold, who even in his 14-3 season was only the number 11 composite quarterback grade here. Shout out to SF Data Niners for putting together this statistical list. This compiles a lot of the advanced statistics, including QBR, which is really good. It's going to include a lot of stuff under one hood, so you're being as broad as possible with the evaluation. EPA per play, CPOE, bad throw percentage, pressure to sack percentage, air yards per reception. I'm not so sure this should be included. Brock Purdy scored really well in it last year. He actually was number 1 in air yards per reception in 2024, but I think that's more of a stylistic stat. Anyway, I digress. That one tends to help Brock Purdy in this ranking. Even in his worst season, he ranked number 5. And you've got Darnold at 11 and Geno Smith way down at 17. So if Geno gets over 40 million as a middle tier quarterback at best, and Sam Darnold gets, who knows, like yesterday I joked that, oh, what if Seattle pays him 50 million plus? Well, then it's case closed for Brock Purdy. He can ask for the top of the market because you've got the middle of the market only getting more expensive. So the floor, in effect, is raising. I think the main point is that Purdy market forces will never be cheaper than they are right now, because we're going to see a lot of quarterback movement here coming up over the next week or so. We've already seen some of the movement. Now we're going to see some of these contracts being signed. And based on what Geno is asking for and what it seems that the Raiders will be willing to oblige based on the fact that they traded for him, things are only going to get more expensive. If the floor gets more expensive, it's really a gravitational pull of the whole market is solidifying at the numbers that we've already seen. And let's be honest, when we look at the quarterback market, The top of it has already been settled for quite some time. I'm doing this by average per year. Dak is at 60 million. That is obviously a little less settled, but by top, I mean the 2 through 7 spots. Burrow at 55, Jordan Love at 55, Lawrence at 55, Tua Tagovailoa at 53.1, Jared Goff at 53, Herbert at 52.5. Then there's Lamar Jackson, who was coming off that franchise tag at $52 million. Then Jalen Hurts, who just won the Super Bowl, at $51 million. The way I look at this as far as a floor right now is that Brock Purdy's price absolutely cannot be below Jared Goff's. That's $53 million per year, $113.6 in fully guaranteed money. You guys know me, fully guaranteed money is more important than the APY, but in the public eye, the APY is going to get the most shine. Goff ranks down here, like number 7 in terms of fully guaranteed money at 113. Prescott's at 129. Burrow's at 146.5. We're just going to ignore Deshaun Watson for the time being, maybe for always, because $230 million fully guaranteed is a joke, as you can see, compared to the rest of the market. So the question, I think, is when we're dealing with a top of the market contract, how much are the 49ers going to have to shell out in terms of fully guaranteed money on top of the APY discussion to satisfy Brock Purdy enough to avoid a holdout? I mean, it basically comes down to that. The 49ers need to get Brock Purdy in the building as soon as possible this offseason. The market forces will never be cheaper than they are right now because the top of this market has already solidified. It's there. And in terms of both fully guaranteed money and average per year. And now we're seeing the floor of the market raise. Geno Smith was down at around number 17 or 18 down here. I'm not going to count, but at the 25 million per year, I'm highlighting it. Geno Smith is moving up to like number 12, number 13 status if he could get that $45 million a year deal. Geno Smith obviously is nowhere near where Brock Purdy is as a quarterback. Sam Darnold, beaten out by Brock Purdy himself. Like Sam Darnold is not where Brock Purdy is at as a quarterback. And both of these guys are going to be moving teams, and both of these guys are going to be establishing floors, which will be under what the 49ers will have to pay Brock Purdy to avoid a holdout to make things move. But gravitationally, they will help solidify that market to where it could only help Brock Purdy in these negotiations. You know, we were talking yesterday in terms of the 49ers structure at the top with John Lynch and Jed York and Kyle Shanahan and the obviously shifting forces that have been coming from the 49ers strategy over the course of the past year. I don't think this is anything new. Mike Silver wrote a nice article yesterday up on The Athletic that I think brought this to closer attention, but it didn't really teach us anything that we haven't already been talking about over the course of the past year or so. Even like I date this back to Eric Armstead and the pay cut that he was offered by the 49ers, and he said no, and he left to Jacksonville. Kyle Juszczyk took a pay cut. Even though the 49ers were still doing the spending in 2024, they were already looking ahead to restraint. We heard from Jed York yesterday. I played the clip from the owners' meetings. He was already talking about the need to start dipping more into the draft. Well, everybody should have seen the writing on the wall coming into 2025, especially the offseason after the 49ers went 6-11. So this is the backdrop of the Brock Purdy contract negotiation. The 49ers are tightening the belt spending-wise, trying to move to more cost efficiency. But I think people are over-dramatizing the entire situation when they say that there's been a power shift at the top of the 49ers organization. There has been a strategic shift for sure. And we've been talking about the strategic shift over the course of the last year. And it's obviously kicked into overdrive after they went 6-11 and we're no longer knocking on the door of a Super Bowl. But a power shift indicates that it's turned into a toxic environment at the top. A strategic shift means that the 49ers are still unified as far as what the brain trust envisions to be the best path forward. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more today. We'll make a couple other videos. This one, I want to focus on the Brock Purdy situation as it relates to the other quarterbacks. But Strategically speaking, and this is the video that we talked about on Friday afternoon. This was the one yesterday before I had to go grill pizza. I turned on the grill halfway through the video. The John Lynch job, I think, is the most important for the 49ers because he is the intermediary. He's the leader. He's the presidential figure in the building that has, I think, most influence on keeping every single leadership figure on the same page. If you can keep Jed York, Parag Marathe, Kyle Shanahan in agreement, you're going to be strategically pulling in the same direction as a football team. There's not going to be a power shift. You'll keep it at a strategic shift. That's a big, big delineation. There has to be shared vision at the top. And I think John Lynch is the rudder that has, so far in this era, allowed the 49ers to maintain that shared vision moving forward. What is that shared vision? What does it have to be? I think it has to, and in its simplest terms, it has to be one of cost efficiency for the football team. I think that's good for the football team. I don't think you can just throw money at every single problem and hope it goes away in football. I still remember the 2011 Philadelphia Eagles. They tried to do that. They lost to the 49ers. Justin Smith with the punch out, 24-23. That Eagles team was coronated before the start of the season, and then they didn't even make the playoffs. That was a good example, and there have been several other in NFL history of teams that have just spent and not really gotten the ROI that they needed, including the 2024 49ers, who were just trying to rush to win that final Super Bowl. But anyway, the strategy at play needs to be cost efficiency, to build a lean and mean, young and fast roster around a centerpiece quarterback. But you cannot let that cost efficiency bleed into the negotiations with the quarterback in such a way that the quarterback doesn't even show up to the building in the offseason. That's the vision the 49ers need to have on the 30,000 foot level. Yes, they need to become more cost efficient. Yes, they need to become younger. Yes, they need to improve a defense that dropped down to number 29 against the run last year, number 26 overall. Yes, they need to bolster the offensive and the defensive front. Yes, they need to shepherd new coaches back into the mix. Robert Saleh is back into the building. You need to do all this stuff within the context of not spending as much money, because spending all that money is only going to make you older, and it's going to make you a less effective football team. You have to do all of that while crafting a team that mixes good draft picks with some key veteran signings who are able to shepherd the draft picks along. That's all great, and that's all difficult to achieve, and that's all something that the 49ers should be pushing for. But you cannot do it at the expense of not settling this situation with Brock Purdy by the time that it needs to be settled. Some might argue that that's OTAs. Some might argue that that's training camp. I think the earlier, the better, because as we're seeing here, the Purdy market forces will never be cheaper than they are. Everybody always talks themselves into making things cheaper at the quarterback position after the media and fans are done with 3 to 4 months of beating up on quarterbacks over the course of the regular season and the playoffs. But then when contract time comes and people have to put their money where their mouth is, guys like Geno Smith start asking for $40 to $45 million, and there probably is a team, and in this case, it's going to be the Raiders, that gives Geno Smith that kind of money. So all of a sudden, people will realize, oh, the QB position probably isn't going to get any cheaper. The market is the market at the quarterback position because it is so important. It has to be treated in a separate bucket than the rest of the team. You cannot enter your QB1 negotiation in the same spirit that you enter, even a negotiation for Nick Bosa, the closest one as far as impact to a football team that the 49ers have negotiated over the past few years, because they've negotiated a lot of A-list deals, has been the Nick Bosa contract negotiation. That took too long. They needed to get him into the building sooner. That hurt Nick Bosa at the start of the season, and by extension, it hurt the football team. So the 49ers have to make sure that they get on this one earlier, because this has a chance to blow everything up. If Purdy's not there in OTAs, not there in training camp, and I don't know if he plans to hold out or not, but that is his leverage, right? And the leverage is particularly strong in this case because he is the quarterback, because you can't operate without one. And everything, here's one thing that Mike wrote it. I've written it. This is something that I think goes back to John Lynch talking last week at the NFL Combine. The 49ers are in the strategic shift toward more cost efficiency. It just so coincides with the negotiation with Brock Purdy this offseason. So if you look at this just logically and you compare it to other such movements in NFL history, the 49ers are trimming the fat, rearranging the deck chairs, getting everything all tidied up in order at the very same time that they're preparing to dole out the big money to Brock Purdy. And the way the NFL works, quite simply, is you have one of two team constructions that you have to pick. You can pick the cheap quarterback on a rookie deal and the really robust, highly paid roster around him that doesn't require a whole lot of financial efficiency because you could be a little lax, you could be a little undisciplined with the spending, and the owner will still be happy because the cash spent is not that great, right? And in the 49ers case, they spent $343 million anyway, despite the low number of the Purdy contract. But you're still salary cap compliant, and your cash spend probably won't be exorbitant. That's option one, cheap quarterback. Option two, which happens once a good quarterback matures from his rookie contract to a second deal, means that the financial nexus of the team is going to shift to that QB position because the quarterback market is what you see the quarterback market is here. It's very big. I mean, their contract's worth up to $240 million total on this list. And when that shift happens, there obviously needs to be a recalibration of what's going on outside the quarterback position. Otherwise, either your cap situation is going to be in shambles like the Cleveland Browns, or your ownership is going to be spending way too much money, as the 49ers calculated. They said, we can't keep on throwing out a $393 million budget on positions outside of the quarterback when we're about to pay the quarterback around $60 million a year. That's where this deal is going to end up. Like it's inevitable when you look at the market forces. So the shift has to happen. The shift from one, cheap quarterback, to two, expensive quarterback. If your QB is good, and the worst that Brock Purdy has ever performed in his career was this past year, and he's still number 5 on the composite ranking, so he obviously qualifies as a really good quarterback. The shift has to happen, and the 49ers have been bracing for the strategic shift for a while. It goes back to cost savings last offseason with Eric Armstead and Kyle Juszczyk because cap savings carry over from season to season. And it's continuing into this offseason where they're, taking their foot off the accelerator and in an even more aggressive fashion, if that's something that works. Normally you say that you aggressively put your foot down, pedal to the metal, but this time it's the opposite. This time the 49ers are reining back, realizing that they have to build a team the way that the best teams are built in the NFL, and that is through the draft. They hit on the draft in 2024. They're going to have to hit on the draft again into 2025 with these 11 picks. Anyway, back to the top of the show. Brock Purdy's contract in the context of Geno Smith and Sam Darnold movement. Darnold probably to the Seahawks. Wouldn't that be something if he signed a big deal with Seattle? Because that would definitely sign, seal, and deliver the positioning for Brock Purdy. But Geno Smith, the first domino in all of this, as somebody who was the number 17 composite QB last year, the fact that he would trade it and the fact that he's asking for it, 40 to 45 million per year, the fact that he might solidify the floor of the top half of this QB market with a contract like that, well, that really tightens things up here. Because there's not going to be, maybe somebody renegotiates this offseason that's in the upper half of QBs. I think Mike was floating around the possibility of Josh Allen potentially renegotiating, although Allen is such a good performer. Allen could vault to the very top, but if we're obviously taking Deshaun Watson out of the mix. But the main point is that we don't expect, there's nobody looming that's going to sign a deal comparable to the one that Brock Purdy and the 49ers are negotiating this offseason. A lot of times you need a cluster of signings to speed things up at any given position. At quarterback, I think it would help as well. We saw that cluster of signings a couple years ago when we got most of these deals in here. Lawrence, Burrow, Tua, Jared Goff. So that'll, and that the concrete has had time to dry now. That's solidified at 53 to 55 million per year. The crazy thing is, and this is something that has to be mentioned, is that these deals were signed 2 years ago. The cap was 24% lower. The salary cap was than it is now. The cap has risen 24.1% in 2 years and about 9.3% over the course of just the last year. So we've seen historic ascent of the salary cap limit over the course of the past 2 seasons. It's tied to NFL revenues. Yet another reason that the Purdy market forces will never be cheaper than they are right now. The more time people have to get used to the fact that the cap has grown 24% in 2 years, the bigger the chunk of it these contracts will demand. That's just every contract always takes note of where the cap is versus where the cap was when looking at the comparable contracts of the past few years. And the 24% increase is definitely going to have Brock Purdy sitting on more asking power moving forward because there just is a bigger piece of the pie. Now, that obviously isn't directly related to cash spend, though, right? Cash spend is different than cap spend, although the two do impact each other. Cash spend can impact the cap situation. The cap situation is not going to impact the cash situation. That's going to be on 49ers ownership to decide. And that's why the strategic shift and the strategic situation is so important. Everybody at the top of the 49ers organization has to be pulling in the same direction, on the same page. And I cannot emphasize that enough. It's got to be Kyle Shanahan, John Lynch, Jed York, Parag Marathe. They all have to be on the same page so that this Brock Purdy deal gets done in time and it doesn't disrupt the rest of what the 49ers are building. This show is brought to you by Public Rec. Comfortable enough for the couch, sharp enough for the city. For a limited time, you can get 20% off Public Rec by using the code Lombardi at checkout. Just head to publicrec.com, use the code Lombardi, and you are all set. Oh, and when they ask you how you found them, be sure to mention our show. It really helps us out. Upgrade to Public Rec to feel the difference. How about this? What if this happened? I found it hard to believe that it would get to this level with Sam Darnold. But if Seattle does sign Sam Darnold for over $50 million a year, we can watch the world burn. Elmo can watch the world burn. That's what I'll leave you guys with. Sam Darnold at over $50 million a year in Seattle. Will it happen? Probably not. But boy, Darnold back to the NFC West. The 49ers, in this scenario, with any big contract, would have rehabilitated Sam Darnold into a workable quarterback. He then went to Minnesota, put up the 14-3 season, goes to the Seattle Seahawks in a maneuver that you could trace back to his resurrection with the 49ers, working with Brock Purdy, Brian Greasy, Kyle Shanahan, and that entire crew. Just imagine if that was the confluence of events in this situation. It would be pretty cool. And it would also push the 49ers into a position where you just got to get this Brock Purdy deal done because the market forces are never cheaper, will never be cheaper than they are right now.